Tonight on WECT, we're launching a new investigative series called Following Your Money. We've spent the last several months submitting public records requests and going through hundreds of receipts from public agencies here that operate on your tax dollars. WECT's Ann McAdams has details about some interesting receipts from New Hanover County. Ann?
Fran, Chris Coudray is essentially the CEO of the county, so you might expect his expenses to be different from other employees, but in some cases, his purchasing patterns are very different. Tonight, a look at some of the pricey purchases he and some commissioners are making on your dime.
New Hanover County leaders spent more than $10,000 on a trip to New Orleans.
We recently told you about a trip in July where New Hanover County Manager Chris Coudray and 3 commissioners spent more than $10,000 attending a national conference in New Orleans. Just a few months earlier, Commissioners Tom Wolf and Jonathan Barfield went with Coudray to a similar conference in D.C. And once again, we uncovered receipts from restaurants listed as some of the most expensive in town. County records show the trio spent $259 the first night at Bobby Van's Steakhouse on 3 ribeyes at $50 a pop, an appetizer, salads, and dessert. That works out to $86 a person, which is nearly double the county's $46 daily meal allowance for employee travel.
Let's separate between the county policy and who it applies to and who it does not.
County travel policy and spending limits don't apply to Coudray or the commissioners. And that's why he, Wolf, and Barfield were able to go to the famous D.C. restaurant Georgia Brown's the next night and drop another $260 of your money on their dinner. Our delegation invited 2 guests, and together the 5 split 6 entrees in addition to appetizers, sides, and dessert. The following night, Coudray and the commissioners charged another $262 at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, exceeding the county's per diem for ordinary employees on their filet mignons alone.
Is it weird that the county commissioners and yourself and the county attorney and some of the other folks involved are not subject to these guidelines?
I don't think that's weird at all.
For the D.C. conference, Coudray and Barfield stayed at the Washington Hilton. They have both told us that they typically choose their restaurants based on location.
What we attempt to try and do is to stay relatively close to the hotel, to be quite honest.
But some of the restaurants they chose are not that close. Bobby Van's Steakhouse is 20 blocks, or roughly 2 miles away from the hotel. Georgia Brown's is 1.5 miles from the hotel. A search on MapQuest shows Ruth's Chris Steakhouse is the only restaurant within easy walking distance of the conference. A search on Urban Spoon shows dozens of much less expensive restaurants closer to the hotel that could have saved taxpayers hundreds of dollars.
We all do our very best to comply with the general provisions of what is laid out in the policy. But that's not always possible, and candidly, the cost of doing business in Washington is different than it is in Washington, North Carolina.
The D.C. trip cost over $6,000. Coudray said it was worth it, giving commissioners the chance to influence policy through face-to-face interaction with major players. He specifically mentioned influencing lawmakers to lessen the burden of the Bigger Waters Act, which could have raised flood insurance costs for residents here. Live in the studio, Ann McAdams, WECT News.
You're watching WECT News at 11.
In our special report tonight, WECT investigates a follow-up to the series of reports we did tracking how county leaders spend your money.
Yeah, New Hanover County leaders recently chose not to be covered under a new travel policy affecting all other county employees. Chairman Jonathan Barfield said at some conferences it's just not feasible to eat or plan on a budget. And
WECT's Ann McAdams reports receipts we obtained from a recent trip to Pinehurst, though, tell a different story.
We were in Pinehurst last week. The breakfast at that place was $30. You know, there was no way that you could get into your car and drive somewhere to find breakfast and get back to your conference and make things work.
That's New Hanover County Commission Chair Jonathan Barfield during a recent interview explaining why county commissioners shouldn't have limits set on their travel spending. While in Pinehurst, Commissioners Barfield, Zappel, and Watkins joined County Manager Chris Coudray for breakfast at the resort's Carolina Dining Room. The meal cost them $36 apiece after tax and tip, 5 times more than the allowable rate for breakfast set by the federal government. But most of their meals were more reasonable. Barfield and Zappel ate one dinner at Ruby Tuesday. Neither of them spent over $20, a big shift from dinners at some conferences last year when commissioners dined at pricey restaurants like Commander's Palace in New Orleans, and dinner cost them each about $75. Another notable change is what our county delegates chose to order. While steak dinners have been a favorite for commissioners on previous trips, and a $33 steak was an option on the menu at the Ryder Cup Lounge in Pinehurst, Watkins and Coudray picked the $14 burger instead. On their final day traveling for the conference, Coudray and Watkins picked Taco Bell for lunch, and they were both able to eat for less than $10 total. Unfortunately, Coudray was unaware that gratuity was automatically included while dining at the resort, so on 3 separate occasions, when an 18% gratuity had already been added to the bill, he added an extra gratuity, giving the waitstaff a total tip of close to 40%. The county has since realized the mistake and has requested a refund, but it's not yet clear if one will be issued. Coudray says it was an honest mistake. Overall, county delegates seem to be well aware that the public is keeping close tabs on what they're eating while traveling on your tax dollars.
When we do travel, we're always very frugal, and a soup and a sandwich is just fine with me. I don't vary much from what I would normally do at home.
We totaled the New Hanover County delegates' receipts and found Zappel spent the least, $340 during the trip to Pinehurst, followed by Barfield at $348, Watkins at $374, and Coudray at $436. Dawson's expenses were the highest, totaling $700 after meals, 3 nights at the hotel, an extra training course on leadership, and her mileage reimbursement for the trip. With a grand total of about $2,200, the cost for the Pinehurst trip is still just a fraction of what commissioners spent at other recent conferences. You may be curious what commissioners from other counties are spending when they go to these conferences. Columbus County commissioners also made the trip to Pinehurst and were able to keep their expenses much lower.
And we've got a very conservative policy. I think our budget is probably less than a lot of other counties around.
Columbus County Commissioners Trent Burrows, Edwin Russ, and Charles McDowell went above and beyond to save money for their taxpayers, sharing a hotel room on the trip to Pinehurst.
We try to pool and take a county vehicle to events, functions, or meetings, and we generally pile up in one hotel room as the picture you've seen, so we try to be very frugal.
While few people would expect them to share a room, many taxpayers will appreciate the savings they achieved as a result. During the entire 3-day conference, Burrows, Russ, and McDowell spent just $167 apiece, choosing restaurants like Outback Steakhouse and Bonefish Grill to keep their meals within the federal per diem. Commissioner James Pravat joined them on the final day of the conference and spent $183 on the trip, mostly on the cost of an additional hotel room. Ironically, Eamon McKenzie was the commissioner that cost the county the most, and he didn't even go. McKenzie had to cancel his trip at the last minute, so the county got dinged for a $239 hotel charge for a room that didn't get used. Columbus County's grand total, $827. The 4 Brunswick County commissioners who attended the conference each drove separately, which drove up the cost of the trip. Over the course of the 3-day trip, Marty Cook spent $486, Randy Thompson and Frank Williams each spent $469, while Pat Sykes' expenses totaled $451. In all, Brunswick County's expenses were about $1,900. Pender County spent the least. They sent one delegate, Commissioner George Brown. He paid for his own meals and transportation, so the only cost to the county was $246 for 2 nights at the hotel. The federal government per diem allows $46 a day for meals and incidental expenses in Pinehurst. Despite Barfield's explanation that it is an expensive place to visit, federal rankings list Pinehurst as a relatively affordable place to eat.
New Hanover County Commissioners leave Friday for a conference in Washington, D.C. Jonathan Barfield says it won't be feasible to stick to government per diems there either.
The Hilton that we're staying in, there are no restaurants anywhere near around that particular hotel that you could even walk to, other than a Ruth Chris that we're not going to go to. And that's just how it is in those places.
It turns out the commissioners will be staying at the Marriott Wyndham Park Hotel in D.C. We spoke to the hotel concierge there, who says there are a number of budget-friendly options within walking distance, like Chipotle and McDonald's for breakfast or lunch, as well as dozens of other local restaurants with affordable options for a sit-down meal. We'll keep an eye on their spending and let you know how much the trip cost you after the commissioners get back. Reporting in the studio, Ann McAdams, WECT News.